Let's check in with the doc and look at things with a wider lens. Pastor Richards on OMG.
Let's see if we got him on the line. Good morning, Doc.
Hey, good morning, Bing and others in the studio. Talk to me.
Doc,
Yeah,
I want to get your opinion. We spoke on a number of issues this morning.
Mm-hmm.
The one that I want you to specifically spoke about, and if there's another one that Daniel to talk about. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Foreign policy.
Foreign policy?
Yes. I want to hear your views on the foreign policy discussion that we've been having.
Interestingly, let me give a wider context for that in terms of relevance vis-a-vis irrelevance, because Jerry is saying that the whole matter is irrelevant of foreign policy. So you ask yourself, why are we going to be even having a discussion of foreign policy leading into the elections? And China figures prominently into this foreign policy discussion, and particularly, I think ideology, China's political ideology, the level of freedoms versus authoritarianism in China. There are certain things that those who are, permit me to use the term anti-China.
Sure.
There are certain things that those who are anti-China use to put a black mark against China. All right? And the rhetoric and the narrative seems to come from an assumption that China is bad. I'm not so sure, I'm not really clear in my mind with respect to the higher narrative or the meta-narrative of imperialism or hegemony, how different China is. Can I just use two? All right, two kingpins, China and the USA.
No. Let's stay in context. China as opposed to Taiwan.
China as opposed to Taiwan.
Yes.
I don't see Taiwan as being necessarily as a strong imperialistic hegemonic power as compared to China, mainland China. Nonetheless, the black marks against, or the purported black marks against China in their hegemony, wanting. Let me make this clear again, set in context. The domination of China is not merely an economic domination, although much of the narratives that I have been listening to has confined China's move as being economic domination. I think it is more than that. As one who has studied a little bit of history, I understand whether this is the Assyrians, the Babylonians, you're talking the Greco-Roman Empire, particularly the Greco-Roman Empire, their playbook, what the Romans used to be such a power in the world. It was not merely economic and political domination. In fact, the greater and more potent imperialism, as far as I am concerned, is the perpetration of ideological domination. If you're going to dominate a people, if you're going to become an imperialistic power, if you're going to be a true hegemonic power, you have to capture people's mind. It has to be ideological domination. And from way back when, this is something that the technique that the Babylonians used. What they would do to perpetrate this imperialistic ideological domination, what they will do is that they would take whichever country that they conquered, they would take the brightest mind of that country and not beat them, not subdue them, not punish them, not put them in a dungeon, but they will take the top of the cream of the crop when it comes to the intellectual capital and collateral, and they would reschool them. They would teach them, use their best teachers, their best philosophers, best disciples. They would use them, and then again, these people now would speak now into their country, and it's an old playbook of ideological domination. And I think the narrative with respect to China has been restricted to economic domination, political domination. But I think if China is to follow that playbook, it is more of this hegemonic extension of power, which cannot be maintained through the economic prowess. This hegemonic extension of power would be through acquisition through force. And the greatest force that I am aware of is the mental force, the power of the mind, the ideological force. And I think that is what China is doing. Now, we have a problem here in St. Vincent. Bing, you can interrupt at any time, you know.
Yeah, but I want you to bring it home, though, Dr. Richards, because we were speaking specifically about the NDP's decision as they've
Okay.
made.
All right, let me bring that home.
Yes, bring it home for us, please.
Because we are saying, what I'm hearing, and the reason why I give that background is to point out some of the black marks we have against China. And our issue with China is more so not an issue of economic prowess, because capitalists, they have economic prowess and all of that. Our issue with China, and I've heard it articulated, is the whole matter of this narrative about what they do to your freedom, the level of authoritarianism. Do we want that? Do we want that? No, we don't want that. So that has been the major black mark, even as we compare the ideology of China and the ideology of Taiwan. The major point of demarcation and difference is with respect to how much liberty people have, the levels of freedom vis-a-vis the level of authoritarianism.
We are also of the opinion that one of the reasons why persons have got concerned about moving to China as opposed to sticking with Taiwan is what China does with regards to its loans, by granting of loans, and the way they move about like mafias.
When you can't repay.
When you can't repay, and they thinking. But I want to hear from you, though, Doc.
Clearly, that's economic domination.
Right.
That is economic domination. And again, I use the word hegemony, meaning how global powers. This is all geopolitics. These are words that, if you study geopolitics or mess with that, you understand what hegemonic powers do. That they seek to influence and extend control over lesser powers, of course, through diplomacy. But diplomacy has a lot of attendant riders to which you. How do you execute diplomatic power? Is that you have. You get the scales to tip to your side through economic force. So having said that, right, I hear the fear and I hear the narrative against communist China having that kind of control. How they get it is no different from how, for example, the U.S. has a certain level of control, because you can't talk about it is unfair being. I'm really serious. It is unfair to talk about what China is doing to Africa and not at the same time talk about what particularly the U.S. has done to Venezuela. I mean, how is it different? The level of how is it different?
We're not in a discussion about forming diplomatic ties with Africa.
No.
You know what the discussion specifically is about NDP proposing to leave Taiwan and go to China. Now, my feeling on this, okay, the NDP has not put forward a clear argument to us, the populace, as to why. What is influencing this spending move on their part? What are the factors that makes them say, okay, we want to leave Taiwan and go to China? That is my personal opinion, right? I am pro-Taiwan for a number of reasons. Right, but that is, I don't know, Dan.
But we've discussed this openly numerous times.
I'm just saying, a lot of the, again, facts don't really drive a decision as much as feelings, and there are certain feelings that have been generated through the narrative about China, and particularly this whole notion that China is aggressive when it comes to perpetrating the authoritarianism. Do you want to be ruled by a country? Eventually, this whole fear that eventually you'll be dominated by this imperialistic power that really has no regard for your freedoms and your liberties, and that kind of feeling-based discussion is driving the narrative.
But isn't that fair real? Is that real? Is that fair real?
Okay, you want to ask that, Bing? Do you really want to ask that?
Yes.
How is China? Because we are talking about the NDP's association with China. All right, fair. All right, and we have issues because China is of a particular kilt ideologically. Okay, more leftist in their ideology. But I ask myself, right, and Taiwan isn't. But I ask myself, have we examined, for example, if you really want to talk foreign relations, and if you really want to make foreign relations an issue, shouldn't we talk about our foreign relations with other countries that are of the same or similar kilt as China? And we have no issues. Do we have any issues with our association with, for example, with, I'm very careful with these examples. Let me say Bolivia. All right, do we have any issues with that? Where freedoms and liberties might become an issue of discussion? Do we have any issues with a country that has a similar narrative, like Venezuela, where we openly talk about lack of freedom and authoritarianism? Do we have any issues with association with countries like Cuba, Libya? You want me to keep going? Zimbabwe? Let me give you one that's of particular interest of mine, to me. Palestine, because of, again, my whole biblical bias and the recent conventions that have been put in place with regards to Palestine and the work of the PLO and how certain countries are embracing that. You ask ourselves in foreign relations if St. Vincent has that kind of perspective. And so it's not an NDP ULP issue as far as I'm concerned, Bing. I don't know that we vet very carefully and think through why we want to have foreign relations with one country and why we don't want to have foreign relations with another country. All I am saying, to narrow it down to the basis of authoritarianism, liberties and freedom is rather unfair, because the NDP is not the only party that would seek to have this kind of diplomatic relations with countries that might have issues with respect to authoritarianism, with respect to freedoms, and with respect to liberty. That's all I am saying. So if you are going to give the NDP a bad mark and a black mark with respect to wanting to reach out to China, then at the same time, if you follow that argument, you would give parties a black mark that want to associate with countries that do not have or have a similar kind of narrative behind their name, like China. That's all I'm saying.
I got you.
That's a valid point. I think that's a valid point.
Let's get some feedback, because there's some questions or statements to Pastor on this very same issue. Someone is saying Pastor Richard is correct. China is not only... Read that down. I don't have my glasses on. Yeah.
Pastor Richards is correct. China not only practices economic domination, but has a history of ideological domination too. Remember, the only reason why communist Vietnam and North Korea exists in that region is mostly due to Chinese imperialistic intervention.
Hong Kong, can anybody say Hong Kong? Can anybody please say Hong Kong? Okay, good. I think you get my point. And again, it is really, if we narrow down the narrative and make it only a matter of economic domination, we miss the whole thing. True world powers, and you don't have to study the main, and if you trace the development, each one of them has a 200-year term, basically. Rise of a world power, beginning with Babylonian, Assyrians, Persia,
Someone else is
Greece,
asking...
Rome.
Yes.
If you follow, let me finish the point. If you
Yes.
follow all of this, there's one constant thread. You will see politics, you will see economics, but the main thing is ideology. You can't dominate a people if they don't buy into your ideology.
Someone is asking, Pastor, can comparisons be made between China and Venezuela as far as human rights issues are concerned? I think you mentioned that as well.
Yeah, but let me go ahead and say, because again, the issue there is not comparing China with Venezuela. The problem when we go to that horizon is comparing China with the U.S. And, we love the U.S. and all of that kind of stuff. But I have to ask, how different is China's imperialistic moves, for example, in Africa, those are well documented, as compared to the U.S.'s imperialistic moves with respect to Venezuela. China will impoverish, if some follow that, and dominate cities, countries in Africa. In the same way, France did to Haiti. We have seen the outcome of imperialistic domination. But, move across a little bit. The one that we don't want to discuss is the imperialistic domination of Venezuela. And we don't want to talk about how their assets were confiscated and impounded, meaning that you don't have access to your assets. Venezuela is not doing this to themselves. It is the imperialistic, hegemonic big powers that are doing it. We don't talk about who seized Venezuela's state assets. Venezuela did not seize their own state assets. It's a replay of what, basically, in the narrowest sense, what France did to Haiti. Why is Haiti the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere? Why? Because there was a time when Haiti was not like this. Who did this to Haiti? Why do we excuse the hegemonic powers that do that? Who has imposed the sanctions and the blockades against Venezuela? Yes, all well and good for you to talk about what China is doing to Africa. Can we talk about what U.S. is doing to Venezuela? Can we talk about that? And why is it that you're so willing to give a pass to what U.S. is doing to Venezuela, but at the same time a black eye to what China is doing to Africa?
That is not up for question right now, Pastor. The issue is we have diplomatic ties with Taiwan, and one is saying let's move from Taiwan.
And it is convenient to narrow the discussion, therefore, and make China your focus. But at the same time, I am saying...
Are you speaking about the principle?
Widen the focus so you could get a better perspective. Before you give China a black eye, consider what other imperialistic power is doing the same as China. And ask yourself, again, is China the only one out there and trying to be the big bully on the block? But somehow China appears to be a big bully, but the one closer home is not appeared to be the big bully.
We got a question. And
all right, one more. I don't know if this is the same thing. We know of China's predatory loans. That's the same thing?
No.
Okay. Where they end up owning significant holdings in various countries, but doesn't that fall on the borrower country because they borrow way more than they can afford?
It is not as simplistic. To the person who asked the question, Daniel, it's not as simplistic as that. Geopolitics, I don't want to say geopolitics, you can, through your mechanisms of power, bring people to your doorstep begging. Can I just say that and leave it there?
This person will not forgive me if I don't ask you this question. It has nothing to do with the China foreign policy issue, but I'm going to jump to it because he's really going to kill me. Ask Pastor about the Liat $1 share sales. Why he didn't offer individual shares, meaning Prime Minister Gonsalves. Why throughout the region persons were not offered shares in Liat to keep Liat together? Why did the ULP do to shareholders of Lottery Hall, Dock Yard? Is the same decision-making idea practiced by both?
Excellent, because those are all rhetorical questions. I wish I knew. I mean, honestly, I wish I knew why so that I could tell that person. I would love to know why all of that was done.
Okay, let me give you 2 minutes to bring it in, Pastor, with everything.
Yeah. With 2 minutes, I can't say much, but let me zero in on one thing, therefore, that I actually heard it this morning. A bold statement that was made, and we have to reflect on. And I say this as a pastor, and again with my biblical bias. We conveniently, one of your commentators this morning made this statement, and I wrote it down when I heard it so that I can meditate upon it later. We conveniently choose when to be moral and when to be ethical.
True.
I thought shots fired there. If what we have there is an ethic of convenience, a moral of convenience, otherwise called situational ethics, in which when something is done that makes us look bad, then we're like, oh, let's pass it, let's forgive it. But if it makes the other person look bad, then let's drive this home. And this statement was made with respect to a burning issue now that I've heard 3 commentators this morning comment on the treatment of women and the whole idea that how women are treated, whether it is by the NDP or by the ULP or whatever, that is irrelevant simply because part of our culture, this is how woman is treated, and nobody really wants to handle that issue because too much mud can be thrown in their direction, and therefore we can conveniently choose what we want to talk about and what we don't want to talk about. That is a sad statement if our ethics and our morals can be bought by what the end game and the end result is for us. Let us think about that if we can truly be a more moral and a more ethical people, which without respect to party and politics and position, that we can really be just invariably a more moral and a more ethical people and let the chips fall where they may. Something to think about. Powerful statement. Have a good day.
Thank you, Doc. Catch you tomorrow morning.
Catch you tomorrow, bye.
Let's check in with the Doc and look at things with a wider lens. Pastor Richards on OMG.